I never thought that my wedding day would be the most traumatic moment of my life. Standing there, in a dazzling white dress, surrounded by the scent of roses and the shimmer of organ music, I felt my heart fill with tremulous excitement. David was waiting for me at the altar, the man I had loved for the last 5 years. Everything on this day was supposed to be perfect, the dome of the church sparkling in the morning sun, the rustle of lace on my outfit, the admiring glances of the guests. But in an instant, my world shattered. "The child she's carrying is not my son." These words, uttered in a cold, polished voice, sounded like a bolt from the blue. The church froze. 250 guests, who had been watching the ceremony with affection a few seconds ago, now turned to me, their gazes filled with shock, condemnation, and disbelief. I felt my child pushing inside me, as if sensing my grief. Time has slowed down. David stood in front of me, his brown eyes, in which I had seen love so many times, were now filled with rage and pain. He looked at me as if I were a stranger, a traitor. His fingers curled into a fist, his lips twitched, but he didn't say a word. What about me? I stood motionless, fighting the trembling in my legs, trying to process what had happened. The words of Inez, his mother, still echoed in his ears. I looked up. Inez sat in the front row, her pale blue dress almost a symbol of innocence, shimmering in the soft candlelight. Her face was a mask, but there was a satisfied grin at the corners of her lips. She planned everything. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Bianca Mancini, and this is the story of how I lost everything, only to find something much more valuable than I could have imagined. I met David Rossi at a charity event in Boston. He was a dream come true, successful, charming, with a warm smile that could light up any room. Our romance developed rapidly, filled with candlelit dinners, spontaneous trips, and long conversations about the future. And then there was Inez. At first, she welcomed me cordially. She invited me to tea, told me stories about David's childhood, and passed on family recipes. I believed that I was lucky to have a future mother-in-law. But everything changed when I found out I was pregnant. My God, this is amazing. David circled me around the kitchen, laughing with happiness. We decided to postpone the wedding to an earlier date. We wanted our child to be born into a full family. And then the changes began. Inez became weird. Her smile seemed strained, and her gaze lingered on my stomach for too long. She asked questions about my past, about my former partners. "Are you sure it's a good idea to rush this?" "What is it?" she asked once, pouring me tea. I smiled, ignoring her words. I didn't know then that it was just the first step of her game. The wedding preparations were a whirlwind. Inez insisted that she wanted to help, but now I understand that she studied every detail, preparing her moment of triumph. And now the wedding day has arrived. It was a clear morning. My bridesmaids helped me put on a dress that was carefully tailored to my 4-month-old belly. When my father saw me, he wiped away his tears. "You're beautiful, my girl," he whispered, kissing my forehead. I put my hand on my stomach. "You will grow up in love," I promised my child. As I walked down the aisle, my eyes met David's. He was divinely handsome in his black tuxedo, and his smile made me the happiest woman in the world. The church was decorated with white roses. Inez chose them. She was sitting in the front row, her head bowed in mock modesty, but there was a strange smile on her lips. The ceremony went according to plan until the priest asked the fatal question. "Does anyone have a reason why this union cannot take place?" There was silence. Inez stood up. Her voice cut through the sacred silence of the church like a knife cutting through a silk cloth. "I have proof," she announced, pulling a paper envelope out of her purse. I froze. Evidence that the child my son considers his own was born to another man. Bianca lied to all of us. Everything that happened after those words became a blurry whirlwind, the moments mixed up like paint on a canvas in a pouring rain. Ines walked up to the altar, her heels tapping loudly on the marble floor. Majestic, like a judge passing sentence, she handed David an envelope. "These are medical records. And photos." I opened my mouth to protest, but my voice got stuck in my throat. David slowly tore open the seal and took out the documents. His face paled as he began to read. "It's not true." It finally escaped my lips. But he didn't hear me. I saw his hands tremble, the muscles in his cheekbones tense, and a shadow of doubt cross his face. He flipped through the pages, his fingers touching the paper edges, leaving invisible traces of his pain. When he finally looked at me, there was no love in his eyes from before. Cold. Detachment. A combination of pain and disgust that broke something inside me. "Is that true?" "What is it?" he asked in a hoarse voice, barely above a whisper. "No." I finally found my voice. "David, you know me. I would never." "Dates don't lie, dear." Inez's voice was filled with false sympathy, but there was victory in it. "Conception should have happened during that business trip when you were in New York. Remember? When you were in London." The guests gasped. I stood with my hands pressed to my stomach and felt my world crumble. The whispers of the guests grew, turning into a hum. Condemnation was in the air. My bridesmaids froze, not knowing whether to cover for me or take a step back so as not to get caught in an avalanche of shame. And that's when David made his choice. He silently turned around and left. His best man followed him. Then another one. Then another one. People began to leave the church, as if someone had extinguished the fire of their interest in me, and I remained only a ghost in a white dress amidst a crumbling dream. Some gave me sympathetic glances. Others avoided eye contact, as if my shame could be transmitted to them like a disease. "Bianca." My father's voice broke through the noise. I saw him making his way through the crowd, trying to get to me. But I couldn't stand anymore. I turned around and ran. The side door of the church was ajar, and I slipped out into the cool afternoon. My veil caught on a rose bush, breaking with a soft rustle. I didn't stop. I ran until my legs were weak, until my lungs burned from lack of air, until tears blurred my vision. I found myself in the garden of my childhood, the same one where I used to play hide and seek, when my father taught me to distinguish flowers, when my mother told me bedtime stories. I was cowering by an old bench, my back was shaking, and my wedding dress was now stained with grass and despair. My father found me a few hours later. He silently sat down next to me, put his arm around my shoulders, and I burst into tears in his arms. At night, lying in my childhood bedroom, among the walls littered with memories, I made 2 promises. First, your child. I'll give you all the love in the world, no matter what anyone thinks. And secondly, to myself. Someday the truth will come to light. The days after the failed wedding were covered in a fog of pain. I woke up every morning hoping that it had all been a terrible dream. But as soon as I felt my stomach bulge under my hand, I remembered, this is my reality. The newspapers rejoiced. Abandoned pregnant bride. Shame on a rich family. Dramatic scene at St. Patrick's Cathedral. I couldn't even go out to the store without feeling people whispering behind my back. But my father wouldn't let me break down. He turned our old home office into a nursery. "Yellow," he said, carefully painting the walls, "reminds me of spring mornings. It will be a room full of light." I watched him draw tiny birds on the walls, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to smile. My mother spent hours knitting baby clothes, filling our quiet evenings with conversations about anything but that day. Her gentle voice, the stories of how I myself was a baby, her hands deftly intertwining the threads of soft wool. All this was for me an anchor in a raging sea of pain. But even the care of my parents could not completely shield me from the darkness that threatened to engulf me. The most difficult thing was not the condemnation of society, not the mocking newspaper headlines, not the curious glances in the supermarket. No. The worst part was David's silence. No calls, no messages. Even the formal termination of the lease of our shared apartment took place without his participation, just a notification from the agent. His silence was louder than any words, and it screamed how completely he believed his mother's lies. One day I tried to write to him. I chose my words carefully, explaining that I was ready to take a paternity test, and that it was important for me to understand how Inez had managed to fabricate the documents. I didn't beg him, I didn't ask for love or understanding, I just wanted him to hear me. But the letter was returned. He blocked my address. That evening, I was sorting through the wedding gifts to return them. My fingers trembled as I picked up the boxes, tore open the packaging, and sorted through the porcelain sets, silver cutlery, and linens that were to become part of our home. And suddenly I found a silver photo frame in my hands. The one Inez gave us for our engagement. It was engraved with, "Eternity begins today." The irony burned through me like fire. In a rare fit of anger, I threw it at the wall, watching as the glass shattered across the floor. And at that moment, I felt it. My baby's first real push. Not the light, barely perceptible thrill that I had caught before, but a strong, confident blow. It was like my baby was telling me, "Mom, I'm here. We are together. Everything will be fine." I put my hand on my stomach, and tears began to flow down my face. But for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of despair. Something changed in me at that moment. I got up from the floor, picked up the pieces, and made a decision. I will not let Inez's cruelty define my life. And even more so my child's life. The next morning, I called my former boss at the marketing firm where I worked before the engagement. David once convinced me to leave, saying that he wanted me to focus on planning our wedding and eventually become a full-time mother. Then it seemed to me that it was a sign of concern. Now I saw it as a trap into which I had allowed myself to be driven. Bianca? Gina, my former boss, sounded genuinely pleased. It's been a long time since we've heard from each other. We've missed you. How are you? I mustered up my courage. I want to get back to work. It's an amazing coincidence, she said. We are opening a new digital marketing department. How would you like to lead it? I almost choked on tears of gratitude. But I'm 5 months pregnant, I confessed, expecting the offer to evaporate. Gina laughed. Some of our best ideas come from sleep-deprived parents. When can I start? This conversation was the beginning of my rebirth. I threw myself into my work, channeling the pain into my creativity. My pregnancy was no longer a weakness. She became my strength. At meetings with clients, I put my hand on my growing belly, drawing confidence from the small life that depended on me. The whispers in the office gradually changed. From "poor thing" to "how does she manage everything?" But if life wants to test your strength, it will definitely throw up a new challenge. One rainy Tuesday, as I was leaving a meeting with a client, I literally bumped into Inez. I froze. She was sitting by the window in a small cafe, surrounded by her friends, the same women who had been at my bachelorette party, discussing gifts and playing silly wedding games. The look of shock on her face lasted for a split second. Then it was replaced by the same smug expression I remembered from the day of the wedding. "Bianca, dear." Her voice was too loud for her companions to hear. I wanted to leave. But I couldn't. I could feel their eyes boring into me, their smiles turning venomous when they noticed my rounded belly. Inez did not look away. "You look good," she drawled. Then her lips curved into a smile, and her eyes narrowed. I really hope that you have already figured out who the father is. Her friend's whispers grew louder. I felt the old shame and pain rising in my chest, threatening to suffocate me. It was so easy to let those feelings get to me again, to let the past take over. But at the same moment, my child pushed me from the inside, a strong, confident push, like a reminder, you're not alone. We're together. And I found my voice. I always knew who the father was, Inez, I said in a flat, calm tone. What I don't understand is why you felt the need to destroy your son's happiness along with mine. But I guess it's a matter between you and your conscience. Her face paled slightly. For a moment, something flashed in her eyes, fear, perhaps? But before she could answer, I walked past her, headed to the counter, ordered my decaf latte, and left the cafe with my head held high. My hands were shaking a little, but I did it. I met her face to face, and I didn't break down. That evening, I sat in the nursery, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon, painting the walls in a soft golden light. The shadows on the pale yellow walls, painted by my father birds, seemed to come to life, as if dancing in the rays of the passing day. I opened my laptop. But this time it wasn't a letter to David. It was a diary. I wrote everything down. Not just for yourself, but for your child. He deserved to know the truth. He deserved to know where he came from and how much he was loved from the very beginning. Your grandmother thinks she's destroyed us, I wrote, my fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. But she doesn't understand that love cannot be destroyed by lies. It can only be transformed. And you, my baby, are proof of this transformation. I wrote until my fingers hurt. I didn't know then how important this diary would turn out to be. And she certainly couldn't have imagined that years later he would be the key to exposing Inez's carefully constructed web of lies. But that night, he was just a way to preserve our history. A story that no one can distort. The next morning, I made another important decision. I started documenting my pregnancy. Every month, I photographed my growing belly, the nursery, in which tiny blankets knitted by my mother were already waiting. I saved all the ultrasounds. I created a timeline. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone. It was because I refused to let Inez's version of events be the only record of that time in our lives. As the birth approached, I noticed that my thoughts about David were slowly receding. A man who could leave without even listening to me. A man who could so easily believe the worst about me. He wasn't who I thought he was. The real betrayal wasn't just in Inez's words. It was in his willingness to accept them without question. Old Bianca died on that altar. But the woman who rose from these ruins was stronger than I could ever have imagined. I was my own child. I was writing our own story. A story that needed no confirmation from the Rossi family or anyone else. But what I didn't know then. That was just the beginning. My son was born on a cool October morning when the sun was just rising over Boston Harbor. As soon as I heard his first scream, everything else disappeared. The pain of the past months, betrayal, judgmental looks. None of that mattered anymore. I looked at his tiny, perfect face, and a warm, deep, endless feeling of love spread inside me. He was all that mattered. And then I saw his eyes. Brown. David's eyes. My heart sank. I closed my eyes for a moment, but when I looked at my son again, there was no doubt. It wasn't a reminder of the pain. It was a reminder of the truth. That no amount of lies and manipulation can change reality. What do you want to call him? Mom asked softly, gently brushing the damp strands of hair from my forehead. I already knew the answer. Armando. How's your father? I nodded. Armando Mancini. Not Rossi. This bridge was burned on the day that was supposed to be my wedding day. When I held him in my arms that first morning, his tiny body was pressed against me, warm, trusting, serene. I whispered promises in his ear. I'll protect you. Not only from physical harm, but also from the poisonous legacy of lies that marked his appearance in this world. But the reality was cruel. The nurses at the hospital continued to comment on how much he looked like his father. What a striking similarity. Oh, those curls. Just like Dad's. And a dimple on his cheek. Adorable baby. Every word was like a blade that stabbed into my heart. But they weren't wrong. Armando was a mirror image of David, from his dark curls to the dimple that appeared when he smiled in his sleep. In the quiet hours of the night feedings, I looked at his face and wondered. Did David ever think about us? Had he ever doubted his mother's story? But as the days passed, I couldn't live in the past anymore. My parents were absolutely fascinated by their grandson. Dad spent hours walking around the garden with Armando, showing him the birds, telling him about the trees and flowers. Mom filmed every achievement on camera. The first smile. The first laugh. The first tooth. The first step. But sometimes, when she thought I wasn't listening, I caught her thoughtfully whispering, "He's Rossi to the core." But she was wrong. Armando was Mancini. And I was determined to raise him with the same strength and integrity that name represented. Work has become my refuge. Gina, my boss, has set up a small nursery next to my office so that I can be near my son. I worked with renewed vigor. By Armando's first birthday, I had earned a promotion. We moved into our own apartment, a cozy two-room apartment with a view of the park. Life has settled into a comfortable rhythm. The mornings were a whirlwind of children's laughter, hasty breakfasts, trips to the office. We spent our lunch breaks in the park, where Armando squealed with delight, chasing pigeons and squirrels. The evenings were our special time, a warm bath, a bedtime story, strong hugs. In those moments, our little family of two felt complete. But the past never remains buried. When Armando was 18 months old, I received an unexpected package at work. A simple box, with no return address. There was a silver rattle inside. I froze. She was an exact replica of the one David used to play with as a child. There was no note. But I knew who it was from. Inez. She was watching us. A chill ran down my spine. I should have thrown it away. But instead, I locked it in my desk drawer, next to the diary I'd been keeping since the beginning of my pregnancy. Something told me that it wasn't over yet. But I wasn't looking for justice. I just wanted to give Armando a better life. As Armando grew up, his personality became brighter. He was curious. He was constantly asking questions, hungry for knowledge, looking for adventures. At the age of 3, he could name all the species of birds that flew into the garden, and knew every line of "Good Night, Moon" by heart. He was kind. He always shared snacks in the playgroup and comforted the other kids if they cried. And then one day, in the park, he asked the same question. The one I was afraid of. "Mommy," his brown eyes looked at me with childlike innocence, "why don't I have a daddy?" My heart stopped. I knew this day would come. But it seemed to me that I still had time. "Why do you ask, honey?" "Jake said he has a dad. And so does Benjamin. They said that soon there will be a dance of dads and daughters in the kindergarten." He frowned, trying to make sense of it. "But I don't have a dad." My fingers involuntarily tightened on the sleeve of his jacket. I set him down on our favorite bench, the one that stood under the big spreading oak tree in the park. The branches, swaying in the wind, rustled softly, creating a feeling of comfort and security. I took a deep breath. "You have a dad, darling," I began carefully, choosing each word carefully. Sometimes families are different. Some children live with their mom and dad, and some live only with their mom. Or just with dad. He thought about it, hugging his knees, and finally looked at me. Where's my dad? His big brown eyes, so similar to David's, looked at me with hope. I felt something constrict inside. Your dad lives far away, I said carefully. But this does not mean that you are loved less. You have me, Grandpa, Grandma, and we love you more than all the stars in the sky. He nodded, seeming to accept this explanation. But I knew that the older he got, the more questions he would have. I've already started writing letters to him. Letters explaining everything that had happened. He had a right to know the truth. But the truth, even the most honest, brings with it pain. Work remained my anchor. By the time Armando was 4 years old, I had been promoted to Vice President of Digital Strategy. With the promotion came changes. I was able to move to a more prestigious area with excellent schools. I started a small consulting business. I worked with startups, helping them build marketing strategies. Every dollar earned went into savings for Armando's future. But success had its price. One evening, as I was leaving a meeting with a client in the city center, I saw him. David. He was getting into a taxi, his perfectly pressed, expensive suit fitting him flawlessly. I expected my heart to tremble. But that didn't happen. Instead, I felt a strange mixture of pity and gratitude. Pity, for what he lost due to lack of trust. Thanks for the life I built without him. Armando was doing well in his new kindergarten. His teacher, Miss Condi, has told me more than once how impressed she is with his intelligence and kindness. He's a real old soul, she smiled. Always takes care of others. She didn't know that every night I read adapted psychology books to him, explaining how to understand your emotions and be empathetic. I was determined to raise him as a person who knows what trust means. But fate had its own plans. One day, on a Tuesday afternoon, there was a call from the school. Armando collapsed during recess. He's getting stitches, they told me. You need to come urgently. I rushed to the emergency room, my mind racing between fear and worry. I didn't know that this simple accident would trigger a chain of events that would change everything. The emergency room was overcrowded. Doctors, nurses, and patients were all scurrying through the corridors, creating chaos. Armando bravely held my hand, more worried about missing his favorite cartoon than the cut on his forehead. Mommy, he whispered, his voice sounding a little childish, can we have some ice cream when the doctor seals my suture with a superhero band, aid? I laughed and stroked his curls, feeling a surge of incredible love and protection. The emergency department resembled a red-hot cauldron of chaos. The hospital corridors were filled with medical staff, who were rushing between the beds with extreme efficiency. Somewhere behind them, muffled screams, the monotonous beeping of instruments, and the curt commands of doctors could be heard. I held Armando tightly to me. His small body was trembling, but he was surprisingly calm. He only touched the cut on his forehead with his fingers from time to time, until I gently removed his hand. Mrs. Mancini? The nurse's voice rang out. We got up, and at the same moment the door of the emergency room opened. Paramedics quickly wheeled in an elderly woman on a stretcher. She was conscious, but her face was contorted with pain, and her hand was clutching her chest. And David followed her. I froze. He was disheveled, worried, and his eyes darted between the faces of the doctors who were fussing over his mother. And Inez was there. All her arrogance, which I encountered in that cafe, evaporated. Now in front of me was a frightened woman, pale, trembling, grabbing her son by the sleeve, like an anchor in a raging sea. My first instinct was to turn away. Protect Armando from this clash of past and present. But before I could move, the bandage on my son's forehead slipped off, revealing a fresh wound. A thin trickle of blood ran down his cheek. He sobbed softly. It was the first time all evening that he was really scared. The sound of his restrained sob cut through the hospital noise like a blade. I felt the moment when David saw us. Our eyes met across the crowded waiting room. I watched as his face changed, as his gaze shifted from me to Armando. I saw the exact moment when he found out. How could this not happen? Armando was an exact copy of him. Every curve of his face, the same dimple in his cheek, the same way of frowning when he was unhappy about something. Bianca. David's voice was barely audible over the noise of the hospital. But I heard him clearly, as if he had whispered that name right into my heart. Inez, distracted by the doctors, hadn't noticed us yet. Mrs. Mancini, the nurse repeated, with a hint of impatience. We need to treat the wound urgently. I nodded, picked Armando up in my arms, and followed her. There were quick footsteps behind me. Please, David spoke in a trembling voice. What's his name? How old is he? I slowed my pace. She hesitated. Then she answered softly. Armando. He's 4 years old. The math wasn't difficult. David's face paled. He was silent, mulling over the information that had just shattered his reality. His gaze never left Armando's face, as if he was trying to find at least one feature that would prove the opposite to him. But she wasn't there. The doctor is ready, the nurse's voice rang out, pointing us to the examination room. I turned around and went inside without looking back. But when the door closed behind me, I heard Inez's voice. Her voice was anxious, almost panicked. And then the sound of retreating footsteps. The next hour passed in tense anticipation. Armando needed 6 stitches. He held himself like a real hero, squeezing my hand and telling the doctor about his favorite superhero, Iron Man. You're the bravest boy I've ever met, said the doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Lewis. She smiled and took out a box of Band-Aids. I'm going to give you not 1, but 3 superhero patches to choose from. Armando beamed. Can I have all 3? Of course. I squeezed his small hand, feeling again the unwavering love and strength he gave me. No matter what happens next, I will protect him. While we were waiting for the discharge documents, there was a soft knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was. David was standing in the doorway. He looked uncertain, somehow aged, even though it had been only 4 years since our last meeting. But there was something in his eyes that wasn't there then, in the church. Doubt. Weakness. Awareness. I gritted my teeth, preparing to push him away, but before I could speak, Armando tugged on my sleeve. Mommy, he whispered, looking at David with wide eyes, this man looks like me. The pain hit me in the heart. I pressed my lips together, not knowing what to say. David was also silent. Dr. Lewis returned with our documents and paused for a moment, looking from David to Armando. I could see the understanding in her eyes. But with professional discretion, she didn't say anything. She just quickly finished the wound care instructions and left us alone. David's voice was cracked, as if he could hardly believe he was saying it out loud. I need to. Can we talk? Before I could answer, Armando announced with a smile. Mom promised ice cream. He didn't even notice the tension in the room. David blinked, as if only now realizing that he was talking to a 4-year-old boy. Do you like ice cream? Armando nodded enthusiastically. Chocolate is my favorite. David smiled faintly, his eyes suddenly filled with tears. Mine too. Really? Armando beamed. He touched his stitches carefully, then looked at me. Mom says I'm brave, so today I get an extra sprinkle. I watched this interaction, feeling emotions that I couldn't quite name. anger, pain, the instinct of protection, but also the undeniable reality. It was the first time I had seen a father and son together. David looked away. My mother, he suddenly began. She had a heart attack. She's having tests now, but... He paused and ran his hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. Bianca. I was such a fool. He exhaled heavily, shaking his head. What she showed me that day. I abruptly raised my hand, interrupting him. I nodded towards Armando, who was enthusiastically playing with band-aids on his arm, clearly not listening. Not now. David nodded. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, took out a business card and placed it on the examination table. Please. I didn't touch her. When you're ready, he continued, his voice trembling, I need to understand everything. He turned to leave, but at that moment Armando raised his head and cheerfully shouted. Goodbye. I hope you get ice cream too. David stopped in the doorway. His shoulders shook. But he didn't turn around. Thank you, Armando. I hope you feel better soon. And he went out. I didn't look after him. I just hugged my son tighter. Later, when Armando and I were returning home, he fell asleep on my shoulder, exhausted by the events of the day. His familiar scent, mixed with antiseptic and chocolate, made me smile warmly. But there was a business card in my bag, like a hot coal. That night, when Armando was already asleep, I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out my old magazine and started writing. But this time I wasn't just documenting our history. I was writing a letter to David. It's time for the truth. Not just for Armando. For all of us. But while I was sitting writing, something else was happening in another part of the city. In a quiet hospital room, Ines opened her eyes to her own mortality. Lying on the snow, white sheets, her breathing was heavy and her heart was restless. And then something broke inside her. The lies that she had been holding in her hands like a shield for years suddenly became too heavy. While I was writing David a letter, she was making a confession to her son. A confession that would shake the foundations of everything he believed in. The next morning, I drove Armando to school. He proudly showed off his superhero patches to friends, happily telling the story of how he was so brave that they gave him 3 patches at once. I smiled. But I had no idea that at that very moment David and I were spending the night uncovering different parts of the same tragic puzzle. The truth is about to come out. But I couldn't have foreseen this. When I got to the office, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Bianca. This is David's mother. She wants to see Armando. She's asking about him. You are welcome. She says she needs to fix everything. Before it's too late. I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the delete button. How much pain did she bring me? How many tears have I shed because of her? How many years of my life have been ruined by her lies? But then I remembered Armando's words from the day before. This man looks like me. He deserves to know his family. That's it. Even the parts that caused us such deep pain. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Can I trust Inez's dying remorse? And more importantly, can I trust David again? The answer came sooner than I expected, and in a way that none of us could have predicted. Because sometimes it takes the innocent heart of a child to heal the deepest wounds. And Armando was going to prove that love can really overcome lies, even if the path to truth is paved with unexpected sacrifices. I spent the whole morning staring at David's text message. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I wrote and immediately deleted reply after reply. It's a trap, the rational part of my mind screamed. This is another manipulation by Ines. But something inside me told me that this time was different. Perhaps it was the desperation in David's voice at the hospital. Or maybe it was the way Inez looked at the stretcher, not as a woman accustomed to controlling the fate of others, but as a person who suddenly realized that time was no longer on his side. And in the end, I answered, "I need to talk to you. Tonight. In private. After Armando falls asleep." He answered right away. "Thanks." Named the place and time. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near my apartment at 2000 hours. Neutral territory. Public enough to feel safe, but quiet enough to discuss everything that needed to be said. The rest of the day passed in a fog. I replayed the conversation that awaited us over and over in my head. In the evening, when I was putting Armando to bed, he suddenly looked at me and asked, "Mommy, why did that man cry when he saw me?" I froze, running my fingers through his dark curls. How can you explain to a pure child's heart that sometimes adults cry not from pain, but from the realization of the truth? Sometimes adults cry when they see something amazing. Like a superhero band aid? His eyes widened. I smiled, kissing him gently on the forehead, avoiding a fresh stitch. Something like that. Sweet dreams, my brave boy. Sweet dreams, Mommy. When I arrived, the coffee shop was almost empty. David was already there. He was sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. I stopped for a second. He stood up when he saw me. I noticed that his tie was loosened and his shirt cuffs were rolled up, an unusual mess for a man who always looked immaculate. "I remember you drinking coffee," he said softly. "Vanilla latte with an extra portion of foam." I sat down, cupping the cup in my hands, but I didn't touch it. I was looking at him. 5 years. "Why now, David?" My voice was flat, almost emotionless. Why did she suddenly want to see him? He ran a hand through his hair. The same familiar gesture that made something inside shrink. "She's dying, Bianca." I didn't flinch, but everything was cold inside. The heart attack was worse than we thought. He took a deep breath. "There is extensive damage. She refuses bypass surgery." I didn't blink. "She says." His voice faltered. "She says she doesn't deserve to live with what she's done." I paused, feeling my heart pounding loudly in my chest. "What exactly did she tell you?" David slowly pulled a folded piece of paper out of his jacket pocket. "She wrote a confession last night." I didn't move. "I assured her this morning." He unfolded the letter, ran his eyes over it, and began to read. She described in detail how she fabricated the documents. I remained motionless. How she paid a lab technician to create false paternity test results. The air in the room was thickening. How did she organize all this? He clutched the piece of paper, his fingers turning white. "Because she thought you were taking me away from her." He looked up sharply. "She was convinced that I would move to New York for your career." He looked crushed. "She couldn't bear the thought of losing me." The room began to spin slightly. For 5 years, I carried this lie inside me, clinging to it like an armor. And now, hearing the truth, spoken out loud, spelled out, understandable, obvious, was almost unbearable. I took a deep breath. "And you?" My voice was barely audible, almost a whisper. "What do you think now?" David closed his eyes for a second, as if giving himself a moment to digest the horror of his own betrayal. "I think." His voice broke. He ran his hand over his face, then looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. "I think I'm the biggest fool in the world." I didn't turn away. "I think I've thrown away everything that mattered." His fingers twitched as he reached across the table, but didn't touch my hand. "I think I was too weak to stand up to her." He smiled bitterly, but it wasn't funny. I was too afraid to trust my heart. He paused, then looked at me again with absolute pain in his eyes. I think. He exhaled. I missed 5 years of my son's life. He ran his tongue over his dry lips. And I'll never forgive myself for that. I didn't give him time to wallow in regret. My voice sounded firm. His name is Armando. I paused. Armando Mancini. I said it so that he would understand that the name Rossi has no power over my son. And he's the most amazing little boy you can imagine. David stared at me, his fingers curled into a fist on the table. He likes chocolate ice cream and superhero stories. I knew that my every sentence was cutting into him, but I didn't care. He can name every bird in the park. He always shares his snacks with the other kids. He's kind. He's brave. He's smart. I held my breath before adding, and I did everything in my power to protect him from the pain that you and your mother caused. David took his hand away and nodded slowly. You did an incredible job with him. His voice was quiet, steeped in respect and pain. I saw it yesterday. He smiled, but his eyes were sad. He's perfect. He's not perfect. I shook my head. He's real. I looked straight into his face. He's a little boy who sometimes asks about his dad. I took a deep breath. He deserves to know where he's from. My voice turned steely. But he also deserves protection from anyone who might hurt him, emotionally or otherwise. David did not look away. I want to fix everything. His voice was trembling. I know I don't deserve a second chance. I didn't let him have any illusions. He blinked, but continued. But he deserves it. He clenched his jaw, trying to keep his emotions under control. He deserves to know his family. He looked away for a second, and then looked at me pleadingly. Even her broken parts. I didn't say anything. And my mother, Bianca. I tensed up. She's not the person who hurt you. I stared at him. Guilt has been tearing her apart for years. He sighed heavily. She found out that she might die without ever meeting her grandson. His voice became quieter. Without making amends. It's too late. My heart was beating too fast. She made her choice. David lowered his head. It broke something in her. I picked up my phone and found a picture of Armando. His first day in kindergarten. I handed it to David. He held his breath. On the screen, a beaming boy in a backpack with Batman was laughing at the camera, unaware of the pain that adults had brought him. That's what you're asking me to do. I looked at him. You're asking me to risk this happiness. I didn't look away. You're asking me to let the woman who took so much from us into his life. David covered his face with his hands. Tears were slowly rolling down his cheeks. She's not apologizing. I froze. He raised his head. She just wants to meet him once. Why? To tell him the truth. He swallowed the lump in his throat. In any way suitable for the child. Why? He sighed. So he knows it's not your fault. I gripped the cup with my fingers. That his father was a coward. I closed my eyes. And that his grandmother was wrong. He was looking at me. She wants to tell him the truth, before she dies. I sipped my iced coffee, thinking about the diary I've been keeping all these years. I couldn't accept it right away. But I could have made conditions. I looked up. I have conditions. David straightened up, wiping his eyes. Whatever. First of all, my voice didn't waver. I'll meet her alone. He nodded. Secondly, if I let her see Armando, it will be on my terms. I leaned closer. I can terminate the meeting at any time. Of course. And thirdly, I paused. If you want to be in his life, you need to earn his trust. I clenched my fists. Don't disappear when it gets hard. I met his gaze. And don't ever let your mother manipulate the situation again. My voice was as hard as steel. Armando is not an instrument of redemption. I leaned closer. He's a kid. And he deserves to be loved. David looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. I understand, David said solemnly. I'll do whatever it takes. He looked at me with a steady gaze that was no longer in doubt. I've already started therapy, he continued. I'm trying to figure out how I let my mother control me for so long. How could I doubt you so easily? He lowered his head. I know that I have a lot of work ahead of me. We were sitting in that quiet coffee shop, and the weight of 5 years of pain and secrets hung between us. My phone was vibrating. A message from my mother. I opened it. A photo of Armando sleeping with a stuffed penguin in his arms. His face was peaceful, and his fingers were tightly clutching the toy, as if it was his protection from the whole world. Looking at him, I made a decision. I put the phone away. Tomorrow, I said, looking at David. He looked up. I'll meet her tomorrow. He nodded slowly. But I caught his eye and warned him. If this is another manipulation. If she hurts him. David didn't let me finish. I won't let her do that. He exhaled. Not this time. I promise. But what I didn't know at the time was that Inez's confession was just the beginning. The next 24 hours will break us down, revealing revelations that will shake us all to the core. And Armando will play a role in this that none of us could have foreseen. Because sometimes the path to healing comes from the most unexpected directions. And sometimes it takes a child's pure heart to show adults the way back to truth and forgiveness. The hospital corridor seemed endless as I walked to Inez's room. Each step was harder than the last. My heart was pounding with a mixture of anger and anxiety. I left Armando at school, telling him I had an important meeting. His farewell hug gave me strength. But now, standing in front of the door of room 415, I could feel that power fluctuating. I could see her through the glass in the door. Inez. She was leaning on a pillow, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered her. The immaculately dressed woman who ruined my wedding day has disappeared. Now an elderly patient was lying in front of me, connected to monitors and IVs. Her silver hair lay lifelessly on the pillow. Come in, Bianca, she called weakly, noticing me through the window. Please. I went in, but stayed at the door. There was silence in the room, broken by the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Finally, Inez spoke. Her voice was trembling. You look good. She smiled faintly. Motherhood suits you. I didn't let her continue. Let's not do this, Inez. My voice was firm. No small talk. No more pleasantries. I met her gaze. You wanted to see me before meeting Armando. I crossed my arms over my chest. I'm here. Speak. She closed her eyes for a moment, and tears began to flow down her cheeks. You're right, of course, she whispered. With a trembling hand, she reached for the envelope on the bedside table. It's all here. She handed it to me. Original documents. Modified receipts from the laboratory. The emails in which I organized this terrible plan. But then she pulled out another sheet. A handwritten letter. This is my full confession. I took the envelope, but I didn't open it. Why? This question has been haunting me for 5 years. And now, finally, it's out of my mouth. Why did you do that? She turned away, her lips trembling. Because I was afraid of losing David. She took a deep breath, fighting her emotions. When he met you, everything changed. She smiled slightly, but there was pain in her eyes. He started talking about moving to New York for your career. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if trying to banish the memories. About starting a new life. She wheezed, her fingers clutching at the blanket. Far from Boston. Her voice became a hoarse whisper. Away from me. She was trembling. And then you got pregnant. Her monitor beeped louder, and her pulse raced. I convinced myself that you were luring him into a trap. She closed her eyes. That you'd take him away forever. Her chest was heaving. I've become obsessed. She paused, her breathing coming in ragged sobs. I didn't look away. That's why you destroyed us both. My voice was icy. Inez looked up at me. You didn't just hurt me, Inez. My heart was pounding loudly. You hurt your own son. Her lips twitched. You deprived your grandson of his father. She closed her eyes. I know. Her voice was cracked, like cracked porcelain that was about to shatter into pieces. When David told me about how he saw you and Armando in the emergency room, how he saw his own face in that little boy. She swallowed, letting out a barely audible sob. Bianca, I was dying inside. Her fingers trembled on the thin hospital blanket. I've been dying of this guilt for years. She took a shuddering breath. But the moment I realized what I had done to my own grandson. Her heart rate monitor beeped sharply. A nurse burst into the room, scanned the screen, then shifted her worried gaze to me. Mrs. Rossi needs to stay calm, she warned, checking her vitals. I watched in silence as Inez forced herself to take a few deep breaths. When the nurse left, I asked, Do you want to meet Armando? She looked up at me with difficulty. Why should I let you? Inez took a few more slow breaths, gathering her strength. Because he deserves to know the truth. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, as if she was afraid to meet my eyes. And because I'm dying. I didn't flinch. She continued. The doctors say that I have a week at most without surgery. She closed her eyes. Even with surgery, my chances are slim. I listened in silence. I refused the operation because I need to do it first. She took a deep breath. I need to fix this. I clenched my fists. And how exactly do you plan to make 5 years of lying right? My voice was as cold as a knife blade. She shook her head. I can't. She looked at me bitterly. But I can give him something precious. I tensed up. The truth. She adjusted the pillow as if her words were scaring her. The truth about his parents' love. I blinked at him. The story of how my lies tore her apart. I inhaled slowly. And that it was never his mother's fault. She paused carefully before adding. He should know that his father did not leave him voluntarily. My chest tightened with pain. That his mother fiercely defended him. And finally, her voice broke. What about his grandmother? Her lips twitched. I made a terrible mistake. She lowered her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. I slowly sat down in the armchair by her bed. I was clutching the envelope she had given me. I opened it. And she began to read. The complex web of her manipulations unfolded in front of me with every line. Modified medical records. Fabricated photos. Fake witness statements. It was the greatest act of betrayal, and it was built down to the smallest detail. I slammed the envelope shut. Does David know about all this? Inez nodded. I told him everything yesterday. She bit her lip, as if remembering that moment. Bianca. I've never seen my son so angry. I didn't blink. So devastated. She closed her eyes. He barely said 2 words to me after I finished. She took a shuddering breath. He was just sitting there, staring at the wall, tears streaming down his face. She squeezed her eyes shut. And then he got up and left. I ran my tongue over my dry lips. He came back this morning. I raised an eyebrow. Just to tell me that you started therapy. She smiled sadly. To deal with how I controlled his life. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. I turned around. David stood in the doorway, looking exhausted, as if he hadn't slept all night. Our eyes met. His eyes reflected the same pain and confusion that I had felt for years. Bianca, he said softly. He took a step forward. There's something else you need to see. He handed me the phone. The screen was open on an email. I frowned. I found this in my mother's personal mailbox last night. My breathing stopped. She gave me access to everything. I shifted my gaze to the screen. When I started reading the letter, my hand started shaking. Date, 2 weeks after our failed wedding. Sender, laboratory technician. Addressee, Ines Rossi. I need more money. I was silent, but I need guarantees. If you don't answer, I'll tell you everything. I looked at the text, and it went dark before my eyes. He threatened to reveal the truth. I raised my head. You've been paying him over and over again. I looked at Inez. While I was suffering. She stared out the window, motionless. While your son was suffering. She clutched the blanket. While your grandson was growing up without a father. She turned away in shame. My breathing quickened. I stood up, feeling a surge of rage inside me. You didn't just lie. I leaned over the bed. You paid to keep up that lie. She closed her eyes. You paid to steal 5 years from me. She sobbed. You paid for my son to grow up without a father. She trembled. But I didn't back down. And now you want me to believe that you're sorry? She slowly raised her head. And in her moist, glazed eyes, I saw the truth. Her regret was real. I was a coward, Inez whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Every time I thought about confessing, the fear of losing David's love stopped me. She smiled weakly, her pale fingers clutching the hospital blanket. But now. She nodded at the room around her. Now I have nothing to lose. Her eyes were dark with fatigue and regret. And I need to make up for it. But then my phone rang. I shuddered, my heart skipped a beat. A message from Armando's school. I opened it. The words swam before my eyes, but the meaning was as clear as a thunderclap. Armando collapsed again at recess. He got stitches again. He was taken to the same hospital where we were 2 days ago. I stood up with lightning speed. I packed my things. I have to go. Inez sat up. What happened? David jumped to his feet, his face pale. He needs new stitches, I said, already heading for the door. I need to get to the emergency room. Bianca, wait. Inez's voice was weak but desperate. I froze for a second, not turning around. Please. She took a slow breath, gathering her strength. Are you still thinking of letting me meet him, even after everything you just found out? I looked around. A fragile woman who has ruined so many lives. David, who was torn between wanting to follow me or stay with his mother. I didn't know the answer. I couldn't have known. My son needs me now, I said simply. It's the only thing I can focus on. and I went out. But before the door closed, I heard footsteps behind me. David followed me. "Let me drive you," he offered. I held my breath, trying not to get emotional. "Please." Even if I haven't earned the right to call myself his father yet. I looked at him. And for the first time in years, I saw Armando reflected in his face. I made an instant decision. Good. But I held out my hand, stopping him. "Understand, we're leaving because Armando needs medical help." I met his gaze. "It doesn't change anything about what I just learned." David nodded, clenching his jaw. But deep down, I knew. This second visit to the emergency room will lead to a moment of truth that none of us could have foreseen. And Armando will teach us all something important. About forgiveness. And about the power of a child's heart. The trip to the hospital was stressful. David gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I was constantly checking my phone, waiting for new news. My heart ached with anxiety when I thought that Armando might be injured. The irony did not escape me. I shared this parental moment of concern with a man who had missed 1,000 others. "He's allergic to penicillin," I said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. David looked at me for a moment, then turned his attention back to the road. "I'll make sure the doctors know," he replied. His voice was strained, full of worry. And at that moment, he wasn't the man who abandoned us at the altar. He was just a father worried about his son. We found Armando in the children's emergency room. He was sitting on the examination table, his Spider-Man t-shirt covered in blood. Miss Conti, his teacher, was standing next to him. The previous seams have split. But he wasn't crying. He was animatedly telling the nurse how he had tried to save a younger student who had fallen into the bushes. "Mom!" he exclaimed when he saw me. His eyes widened, but then he noticed David. He frowned. "Look, it's a man who looks like me." David froze in the doorway. His face showed too many emotions at once. The nurse shifted her gaze between them, clearly noting the similarities. Then, with the tact of someone accustomed to unexpected family gatherings, she smiled and excused herself to call a doctor. Miss Conti patted Armando's hand. "I'll check on you later, okay?" Armando nodded. I came closer, examining his wound. "Does it hurt, dear?" He shrugged. "Not much," Armando replied bravely, but his fingers tightened a little on my arm. Then he turned to David with childlike ease. "Did you eat ice cream after you left last time?" He spoke as if David had just dropped by to visit us and stayed for a while. "I ate chocolate with extra sprinkles because I was brave." David could only smile, but his smile was bitter and sad. He pulled himself together and took a step closer. "I didn't eat ice cream," his voice was hoarse with emotion. "I guess I wasn't as brave as you." Armando shrugged his shoulders. "It's okay," he said with that childish wisdom that could sometimes baffle even an adult. "You can be brave next time." The door opened and Dr. Lewis came in, the same doctor who treated Armando 2 days ago. She appraisingly looked around the stage. Her gaze lingered on David for a second, but she showed no surprise. "Well, young man, it looks like you really wanted to see us again," she teased. Armando smiled, but then looked at her with concern. "Will it hurt?" He squeezed my hand a little tighter. Dr. Lewis nodded. "Not much, but I think you have enough support to help you get through this." She took out a small syringe with local anesthetic. Armando froze, his lips pressed into a tense line. Then he suddenly turned his head towards David. "Can you hold my other hand?" David froze. "Mom says she helps you squeeze someone's hand when you're scared." He looked at me as if asking for permission. I nodded slightly. He moved to the other side of the examination table and held out his hand. Armando took it without hesitation. And for the first time in 5 years, we were connected through the touch of our child. David hardly breathed. His fingers gently squeezed Armando's small palm. "You're doing it, buddy," he encouraged when Dr. Lewis started working. "Just squeeze our hands as hard as you need to." Armando winced for a second, but he didn't cry. Then he raised his free hand and carefully compared it with David's hand. "You know what's funny?" he asked. "What?" David smiled faintly. "Your hands are the same as mine." He put his little hand on David's big one. "Look," he ran his finger along their identical lines on the palm of his hand. David held his breath. I saw tears in his eyes when he looked at their identical hands. "Yes," his voice trembled. "That's ridiculous." There was a short silence. Dr. Lewis calmly continued her work, but moved as quietly as possible, not wanting to interrupt this moment. Armando looked at me thoughtfully. "Mommy." "Yes, dear?" "Do you remember, you said that some children's dad is far away?" I felt like everything inside was shrinking. "Yes." He looked at David. "Is he my dad? Is that why we look alike?" The room froze. I took a deep breath, knowing that life doesn't wait for perfect moments. This conversation should have happened differently. But it happened here and now. "Yes, honey," I said softly. "He's your dad." Armando processed the information with surprising calmness. "Where have you been?" He looked directly at David, without a trace of condemnation. Just pure childish curiosity. David swallowed hard. "I made a very big mistake, Armando." His voice was trembling. "I listened to the man who lied to me." He looked at me. "Instead of trusting your mom, who always tells the truth." He ran a hand over his face, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I missed the opportunity to watch you grow up." His eyes were red from crying. "And that will be my biggest regret for the rest of my life." Armando tilted his head to the side. "Did you say sorry?" There was simple childish logic in his voice. David nodded. "Not enough." "Not enough," Armando repeated, as if thinking about it. "When I make a mistake," he said with childlike wisdom, "Mom says the most important thing is to learn from it." He looked at David intently. "And try to do better." There was a dead silence. David was barely breathing. Then Armando squeezed his hand a little tighter. "Are you trying to do better?" David closed his eyes for a second, then looked at him with such love and pain that my heart sank. "Yes," he whispered. Tears flowed freely down his face. "Yes. I'm trying really hard." "Everything's ready," Dr. Lewis announced, sticking on the last bow tie. She smiled at Armando. "And I think these stitches will hold better than the previous ones." She held up a warning finger. "But no more bush rescue missions for a while, okay?" Armando nodded solemnly, then turned to David. "Do you like Spider-Man?" He pointed at his stained t-shirt, as if making sure that this man understood important things. David wiped away his tears with a smile. "Yes." His voice was quiet but sincere. "I have all the movies." Armando's eyes lit up. "Mommy only lets me watch cartoons," he sighed. "She says that movies are too scary for kids my age." I felt David's gaze and looked up. "Your mom's right," he said, catching my eye. "She's taking very good care of you." It was at that moment that my phone rang. I was startled when I saw the main number of the hospital. My heart sank. "Yes?" On the other end, the female voice was professional, but with a hint of urgency. "Ms. Mancini, Inez is getting worse. We would like Mr. Rossi to return immediately." I looked at David. He already felt that something had happened. His face was contorted by an internal struggle. I've seen him struggle with a choice. He just found his son. But his mother needed him. I said softly, "She's still your mother." David pursed his lips, closing his eyes for a second, then looked at Armando. "Dad has to go help his mom," I explained. The word dad seemed unfamiliar on my lips, but it was the right one. Armando's face was seriously thoughtful. "Like when you took care of me when I had the flu?" "Something like that," I nodded. He straightened up, his small face set like an adult's. "You should go help her." He looked at David steadily. "Moms need us when they're sick." David knelt down in front of Armando. "Thank you for being so understanding." His voice was hoarse with emotion. "And thank you for letting me hold your hand today." He smiled sadly. "It meant more to me than you can imagine." Armando frowned. "Will I see you again?" David met my gaze. The question was in his eyes. I thought about everything that had happened in recent days. About Inez's confession. About the evidence of her dissection. But the most important thing was what I had just seen. The natural, inexplicable bond that exists between father and son, even when they try to prevent it. I took a deep breath, then said, "Why don't we all get ice cream tomorrow? After school?" Armando's face lit up. "With an extra sprinkle?" David smiled, his eyes moist with restrained emotions. "With additional sprinkling." He ruffled Armando's hair. "I promise." When David rushed to the hospital, I helped Armando change into the spare shirt I always carried in my bag. He was unusually quiet while I was packing our things. "Mom," he finally said. "Yes, dear." He looked up at me with his big, thoughtful eyes. "Daddy's mom is very sick." I held my breath. "Yes." He pursed his lips, as if thinking about something important. "Maybe we can make her a postcard wishing her well?" I froze. "Like the one I made for Miss Conti when she caught a cold." I stared at my son, amazed at his kindness. Even towards those he had never met. And at that moment, I realized that maybe Armando's innocent heart could heal more than just his own wounds. Maybe it could heal us all. But I didn't know then that Inez's condition was worse than anyone could have imagined. And the next 24 hours will put to the test everything that we have just begun to build. Sometimes the path to forgiveness is more expensive than we expected. And sometimes our children show us how to pay for it. That evening, when Armando fell asleep, I sat down at the kitchen table. There was a postcard next to me that we made together. He insisted on shiny markers and carefully drew a family of birds. A big bird. The average bird. A little bird. Everyone is holding on to the wings. The birds stick together, he explained before going to sleep. What family should look like. I was looking at the postcard, naive and touching. And then my phone lit up with a message. From David. My mother had a serious crisis. Doctors say she won't survive the night without immediate surgery. She still refuses. May I come in? I need to talk. 20 minutes later, David was sitting across from me at the same kitchen table where Armando and I had painted a postcard for Inez a few hours earlier. Now this postcard lay between us, half completed, but filled with meaning that neither of us expected. David ran his fingers over the painted birds, and I noticed how his eyes turned red. His tie was loosened, and his shirt was rumpled, as if he hadn't known peace for days. She doesn't listen to arguments, he said dully. He continued to stare at the child's drawing, as if it could give him an answer he couldn't find himself. She says she doesn't deserve to live after what she did to us. His fingers curled into a fist. That she has to pay for her sins. David looked at me, and there was desperation in his eyes. Bianca. I didn't look away. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but he held his breath before asking a question he probably didn't want to hear himself. What did the doctor say about her chances? 50 to 50. I saw his lips twitch. And without surgery? 0. David closed his eyes, as if struggling with reality. She keeps saying that she needs to see Armando first. He shook his head, squeezing his temples. That he wants to apologize to him personally. Then he laughed bitterly. But we don't have time. He didn't finish his sentence. But I didn't need to hear the end. I already knew everything. I closed my eyes, and the manila envelope appeared in front of me again. Full of evidence. Years of lies. Years of pain. But then another voice echoed in my memory. Moms need us when they're sick. I took a deep breath. And then she opened her eyes. Wake him up. David froze. Bianca. If we do this, I looked at him, it won't be for her sake. I held my breath, choosing my words. And for Armando's sake. So that he would never wonder if he could help save his grandmother. David understood. I saw it in his eyes. He nodded. 10 minutes later, I was carrying a sleepy Armando to the car. His favorite teddy penguin was tucked under his arm. And in his other hand he was holding tightly a postcard, which we did not have time to complete. Inez's room was dimly lit. The machines hummed softly, supporting her weakened body. She looked smaller than she had in the morning. Her skin was almost transparent under the harsh hospital light. But when she saw us enter, her eyes widened. Armando. She barely whispered it. Tears instantly flowed down her cheeks. Armando lingered at the door, leaning against me. Are you Daddy's mom? He asked this shyly, as if he was still wondering exactly what it meant. She barely nodded. The words stuck in her throat. David came closer and covered her cold hand with his own. Mom, his voice was firm but soft. Armando and Bianca are here. He exhaled. Do you agree to the operation? Inez did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on Armando. I made you a postcard, he announced, holding out his childish artwork. But it's not finished yet. I need to add more glitter. Inez took the card with a trembling hand. She paused, her lips trembling. She's beautiful. She couldn't take her eyes off the painted birds. Is this a family? Armando nodded gravely. The big bird is Dad. He pointed at the drawing seriously. The average bird is a mother. He looked up at Inez. And the little one is me. He ran his finger over their joined wings. See? They're holding on to the wings. Because Mom says that a family should stick together, even when things are tough. I saw something crack in Inez's face. Her mask of coldness finally cracked. She looked at me. And maybe she really saw me for the first time in 5 years. Bianca, she said faintly. Her voice broke. I don't deserve such kindness. I quietly agreed. No, you don't. I looked at her directly, without taking my eyes off her. But Armando deserves a grandmother. If you're brave enough to be her. Armando frowned, then his face lit up. I want to add another bird. He looked at me excitedly, then at Inez. The grandmother bird. He frowned. But first you need to get better so you can help me choose the right color. Inez's monitor beeped louder. The nurse looked into the room, her face tense. But Inez waved her off. Her eyes were filling with tears. Armando, she said, her voice trembling. She tried to sit up, her body rebelling against her. I have something important to tell you. Armando nodded, listening intently. Inez took a deep breath. A long time ago. She bit her lip, barely able to control herself. I did something very wrong. She was shaking like a leaf in the wind. I lied. And that really hurt your mom and dad. Armando frowned. Did you say sorry? Her lips twitched. Not enough, she whispered. The words came out on their own, exactly mirroring David's response that day. Not enough. Armando nodded gravely. When I lie, Mom makes me sit in a chair for reflection. He thought about something for a second, then added, maybe you need a thinking chair too. A strange sound escaped Inez's throat, something between a laugh and a sob. Yes, she breathed. Yes. I think I know. She took a deep breath, then turned to David. Call the doctor. She closed her eyes for a moment. I'll do the surgery. The next few hours flew by in a blur. Doctors and nurses were preparing Inez for an emergency operation, and the hospital corridors were filled with voices, footsteps, and the rustle of cloth and metal tools. I was sitting in the waiting room, rocking Armando in my arms. He fell asleep, his little fingers clutching his beloved penguin, his chin buried in the soft fabric of the toy. David was sitting next to me. From time to time, he reached out to stroke our son's hair. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't turn around. And then he spoke. Bianca, he said softly, careful not to wake Armando. Thanks. I didn't answer right away. For what? David sighed. For bringing him in. His voice faltered. For giving her a chance. I slowly shook my head. I didn't do it for her. He nodded as if he already knew. I know. He turned away, looking at the sleeping Armando. And that's what makes it even more wonderful. He paused, then added faintly. He looks so much like you. I blinked, surprised by his words. Your kindness. Your wisdom. He smiled slowly, watching our son's every breath. I see it in everything he does. I took a deep breath before saying, and he has your smile. I didn't think before I said it. She just told the truth. And your heart. I met his gaze. When it is not clouded by fear or doubt. David froze, as if my words had changed something inside him. But before he could answer, a doctor came out of the door of the operating room. The operation lasted 6 hours. Armando woke up several times, asked for water, and then fell asleep again, trustingly clinging to me. Around dawn, the doctor finally came out. His eyes were tired but satisfied. She did it. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave my body for the first time. The next 24 hours will be critical, but she's fighting. David closed his eyes, hugging his face with his hands. Whatever happened last night, the doctor added, something gave her the will to live. I looked down at our sleeping son. I knew what it was. Or rather, who? Armando gave her that will. Something neither David nor I could do. Unconditional forgiveness, which can only be given by a child's pure heart. When the sun rose over Boston, painting the hospital windows with golden light, I realized. We are at a crossroads. The way forward will not be easy. Pain. Distrust. Wounds that need to be healed. But watching Armando sleeping between us, his unfinished postcard still clutched in his hand, I knew. Healing was possible. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen watching Armando put the finishing touches on another postcard. Not with shiny markers this time. And with neat pencil strokes. His best attempt is in italics. Dear Grandma. I'm glad you're feeling better. I love you, Armando. I smiled, running my eyes over the letter. The last few months have been a journey. Careful steps. Gradual healing. Inez's physical recovery was a reflection of something deeper. A transformation that none of us expected. The woman who came out of that hospital room was no longer the one who destroyed us 5 years ago. She went to therapy 3 times a week, working on her fears. She's learned to listen, not control. She insisted on paying for Armando's tuition at a private school. Not as a way to buy forgiveness, and as a step towards correcting mistakes. When I first refused, she said words to me that I will never forget. "Let me do this." She inhaled shaky air before adding, "Not like his grandmother." She looked into my eyes. And as a person who is trying to fix at least some of the damage that I have caused, I realized then that she had changed. David and I were on our own path of reconciliation. We started with caution. Controlled sessions. Ice cream after school. Weekend trips to the park. And then, unbeknownst to us, it turned into more. Sunday dinners at my parents' house. Armando blossomed in these moments. He absorbed his father's attention like a flower reaching for the sun. One special Sunday, when we were all gathered around the table, my father took David aside. I froze, expecting a confrontation. But instead I heard something else. Everyone deserves a second chance if they really regret it. Pause. And then his voice became firmer. But if you ever hurt them again. He didn't finish his sentence. And you didn't have to. David understood. He nodded, his face serious, almost grateful. I knew it was a real breakthrough. But an even more important moment occurred later. Armando's school play was a turning point. He was chosen for the role of the wise old owl in the forest fable. And he insisted that everyone be present. Mom, Dad, grandmothers, grandfathers. It could be awkward. But there wasn't. Because watching Armando standing on stage, delivering his lines with sincere concentration, we forgot about the past. We were just proud of him. We just loved him. And at that moment, we were united. After the play, when David was helping Armando take off his owl costume, Inez came up to me. Her voice was soft but firm. "Bianca." I turned to her, expecting anything. But her words startled me. "I'm writing something for you." I frowned. "A full account of everything I've done." She inhaled. "Every manipulation. Every lie." She turned her gaze to the stage where the children were laughing and hugging their parents. Not for publication. Not for exposure. She looked into my eyes. For healing. I didn't know what to say. "Could you read this?" I looked at her carefully. The controlling, proud woman who once terrorized my life is gone. In her place was another Inez. A woman humbled by her mistakes. I nodded. "Yes." I sighed. "I think I'm ready." That night, when Armando fell asleep, I read Inez's confession. It was brutally honest. She described in detail not only her actions, but also her thoughts. His jealousy. Your fear. Their misconceptions. She wrote that watching Armando's unconditional love taught her that real family is not about control or possession. And acceptance and support. Weeks turned into months. David and I continued to raise Armando together. But our relationship has become different. Not the love we once shared. It's a deep partnership. Not passion. It's about trust. We've learned to be parents to each other, not lovers. Inez's transformation never ceased to amaze us. She worked as a volunteer at a women's shelter. She told her story as a warning about the destructive power of control and manipulation. She never asked for forgiveness directly. She was showing it by her actions. supporting my decisions, respecting my boundaries, and, most importantly, loving Armando. Without controlling it, without requiring affection. It's just loving. The day that closed the circle came when Armando turned 5. Our backyard was full of guests. The children were running, laughing, and playing. The parents were talking, raising glasses. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was that for the first time in Armando's history, his 2 families were together. Mancini. Rossi. When we were singing Happy Birthday, I saw something. Something that made my heart stop. Armando held both David and me by the hand. Make a wish, honey, I smiled, looking at Armando as he closed his eyes, preparing to blow out the candles. He took a deep breath, and then, to my surprise, he smiled broadly. I don't need it, he announced proudly. I already got what I wanted. My whole family is here. I felt something warm unfolding in my chest. Inez, who was standing nearby, quietly wiped away her tears. The birds from his get well card were now framed in her living room. 4 birds. Everyone is holding on to the wings. Everyone is flying together. Later, when the party was coming to an end, David stayed to help me clean up. Armando was showing Inez his new toys, enthusiastically explaining to her the principles of magic tricks. David, gathering up the paper plates, said softly, "We did it." I turned around. Not as planned. He sighed, shrugging his shoulders. But we did it. We are a family. I nodded. We are. Maybe that's even better, he suggested. I looked at Armando, who was showing Inez with absolute concentration how to make the coin disappear. And then I realized something important. Sometimes real families are not built according to a pre-written script. And from the ashes of mistakes, becoming stronger than the ones we originally planned. Armando taught us that. Love doesn't have to look like a fairy tale. But that doesn't make it any less real. Less valuable. As the sun was setting, Armando gathered all of us for another photo shoot. Like my birds. He insisted, arranging us exactly as in his picture. And so we stood there. David. Inez. Yeah. And between us he is. Holding us all by the hand. His small fingers gripped our palms so tightly, as if he knew that it was he who was holding us together. A simple but strong love. The love that healed a broken family. Not with loud gestures. Not through dramatic events. And through small acts of kindness. Through daily choices, you can become a better person. Through the belief that the family is worth fighting for. My mom captured this moment. Now this photo is on my desk. Our son. His happy smile. Traces of chocolate glaze on the chin. And David and I are on both sides of him. We weren't a couple anymore. But we became a family again. Later that night, when I was putting Armando to bed, he asked me a question. A question that showed how much he understood everything. "Mommy," he yawned, settling down among the new toys. "Are you still mad at Dad and Grandma?" I ran my hand through his hair, inhaling his familiar scent. "No, dear." I answered honestly. "I'm not mad anymore." He nodded thoughtfully. "They made mistakes," I continued. "But they tried very hard to fix them." I kissed him on the forehead, smiling. "Just like you do when you do something wrong. Remember?" Armando nodded once more, his eyes slowly closing. "And now we're like my birds." He whispered it sleepily. "Flying together." I smiled, kissing his warm forehead once more. "Yes, dear." I stroked his hair. "We're all flying together." When I turned off the light and left the room, I suddenly realized the happy future I dreamed of on my wedding day has finally come true. Just not in the way I expected. Our story didn't end with a perfect wedding. It started with a broken one. But through the pure heart of a child, she turned into something much more valuable. Into a family built on forgiveness, understanding, and unconditional love. And that was more important than any fairy tale. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.